March 2025, Garda officers in Ireland, together with Spanish police and Europol, launched a series of coordinated raids that brought down a sprawling criminal empire. They struck at dawn, simultaneously storming properties in Dublin and safe houses on Spain's Costa del Sol. By the end of the day, 12 suspects were in custody, 6 in Ireland and 6 in Spain, all alleged members of a secretive Irish gang known as the Family. This wasn't the infamous Kinahan Cartel or any household name in crime. For years, the Family had lurked in the shadows, quietly becoming Ireland's most powerful drug trafficking gang. Led by 2 brothers from West Dublin, the Family built a multi-million euro narcotics empire while avoiding the public feuds and headlines that brought down their rivals. How did a group of Dublin criminals rise to surpass even the Kinahan Cartel's influence in Ireland, and what finally led to their downfall? Today, we'll uncover the origins, operations, and ultimate takedown of the Family, a true story of a gang that grew from a local crew to Ireland's dominant underworld syndicate. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what you think about this case. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth true crime documentaries just like this. The story of the Family begins in the late 1990s on the streets of Ballyfermot and Clondalkin, working-class suburbs in West Dublin. In these neighborhoods, a small group of young criminals started to make a name for themselves in the local drug trade. They focused initially on heroin dealing, which plagued many Dublin communities at the time. Among this group were 2 brothers who would go on to lead the gang, Brian Grendon and Philip Grendon. The gang's nickname, The Family, comes from these brothers at the helm, though in truth, most members weren't related by blood. The moniker stuck because of the tight-knit, loyal nature of their crew and the family ties of its leaders. Brian Grendon, born in the late 1970s, was the younger brother and would become the gang's mastermind. By his early 20s, Brian was already deeply involved in high-level drug deals. In 2001, at just 25 years old, he was caught red-handed with a huge haul of heroin. Garda arrested Brian after discovering 1.9 million euros worth of heroin in a pub in Palmerstown, Dublin. This was a massive amount of drugs, indicating that even at that early stage, the group was handling multi-million euro shipments. Brian was convicted and jailed for 6 years in 2002 for his role in that deal. This could have been the end of the gang's story, but remarkably, the Family only grew stronger while its young boss was behind bars. Brian Grendon kept a low profile after his release, learning from his early mistake. He became known for quietly orchestrating operations from the shadows, determined not to draw attention from law enforcement. Brian's older brother, Philip Grendon, was equally entrenched in the drug trade. Philip often handled the gang's international ventures. In August 2013, he became embroiled in a notorious incident abroad. Spanish police in Valencia, Spain, raided Philip's hotel room and found suitcases containing 3.8 million euros worth of cocaine. In a panic during the raid, Philip had actually hurled one of the cocaine-filled suitcases out of his hotel window, apparently fearing robbers or police were about to seize it. The stunt failed. He was arrested and eventually imprisoned in Spain for 7 years on drug trafficking charges. Philip Grendon was released in 2019 and returned to Ireland. His time in Spain showed that the Family's reach extended beyond Ireland's borders even then. They were sourcing product from continental Europe and possibly farther afield. Despite his senior role, Philip largely stayed in the background upon coming home, aware that Spanish authorities and the Garda would be watching him. His experience in Spain would later prove useful as the gang expanded operations there. Alongside the Grendon brothers, another figure rose to prominence within the Family, Derek D.D. O'Driscoll. Derek O'Driscoll, originally from Ballyfermot, was a career criminal with a reputation on the street and some 20 prior convictions to his name. He became one of the Family's top lieutenants and closest confidants to the Grendons. Authorities say O'Driscoll acted as the gang's chief of distribution, coordinating the large-scale movement of heroin, cocaine, and cannabis through the gang's network. In fact, the Irish Criminal Assets Bureau later identified O'Driscoll as the leader of a criminal organization involved in the large-scale distribution of those drugs. This effectively made him Brian Grendon's right-hand man in running the day-to-day drug supply. O'Driscoll was also known known as an enforcer who would not hesitate to use intimidation or violence to protect the business. Decades into his criminal career, he commanded fear and respect in equal measure on the streets of Dublin. By the early 2000s, the core of the family was established. They were a close-knit gang of men from West Dublin, dealing primarily in heroin. The family's modus operandi from the beginning was to stay under the radar. Unlike some gangs, they avoided flashy displays of wealth or public violence that would draw media attention. This was a deliberate strategy. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, Ireland saw several gangland feuds grab headlines, but the family was conspicuously absent from the tabloids. They operated quietly, preferring to grow their enterprise in the shadows, while others fought bloody turf wars. This low-profile approach paid off, especially as larger criminal organizations stumbled. For years, the most notorious Irish crime syndicate was the Kinahan Cartel, an international drug cartel originating in Dublin's Crumlin area. The Kinahan Group built a massive drug empire across Europe, and until recently, it was considered Ireland's top cartel. But in 2016, the Kinahan Cartel became embroiled in a violent feud with the rival Hutch Gang, which exploded into public view after the infamous Regency Hotel shooting in Dublin. That high-profile feud resulted in intense Garda scrutiny and dozens of arrests. Many top Kinahan associates fled Ireland or ended up in prison in the years that followed. With the Kinahans under pressure and effectively retreating from Ireland to avoid the heat, a power vacuum opened up in the Irish drug market. The family seized the opportunity. While the Kinahan-Hutch feud dominated the news, the family quietly expanded its reach. One senior Garda officer later said that the family quietly took over the business that the Kinahans had to leave behind in Ireland. Freed from serious competition, the family could supply drugs to countless smaller gangs and dealers across the country. They moved beyond heroin and began trafficking cocaine and cannabis in large quantities as well. By the late 2000s and 10s, Garda intelligence indicated that the family had surpassed the Kinahan Cartel's domestic operation and become Ireland's largest drug distribution network. It was a changing of the guard in the underworld. The Kinahans, though still powerful internationally, were no longer the kings of the Irish streets. The family had taken that spot, and they did it without splashing their names across newspapers. Even the global turmoil of 2020 ended up playing to the family's advantage. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted international travel and supply chains, making it harder to smuggle drugs. Yet, during pandemic lockdowns, Ireland's drug trade continued to boom. The family adapted quickly to the new conditions. With pubs and nightclubs closed, traditional hubs for drug sales, the gang shifted tactics to keep narcotics flowing to consumers confined at home. They tapped into alternate smuggling routes and exploited gaps in enforcement attention during the pandemic. In fact, law enforcement observed that the family expanded its market share during COVID, further solidifying its dominance while many legitimate businesses were stalled. By early 2021, Garda privately acknowledged that the family was the top target among domestic organized crime groups. The gang's estimated earnings were staggering. Investigators believe the family's drug distribution network was pulling in about €4 million in profits each month by the mid-20s. These profits had to be hidden and reinvested, so money laundering was a critical part of the operation. The family became highly sophisticated in washing their illicit cash through front businesses and investments. One of their favored methods was using legitimate-looking car dealerships. In fact, the family secretly purchased or funded several car sales businesses around Dublin. In one case, uncovered by reporters in 2020, the gang had quietly invested roughly €1.5 million into a high-end car dealership in the city. The showroom sold luxury vehicles like BMWs and Mercedes, providing a perfect cover to mix drug money with legitimate car sales revenue. Crucially, none of the family's known members were listed as owners or directors of the dealership. Instead, they recruited a financially distressed individual, a car salesman struggling with personal addictions, to front as the owner and manager. By keeping their names off the books and never even setting foot in the dealership, the gang could launder huge sums without obvious ties to the business. As one investigator noted, this laundering scheme was deliberately structured so the gang have no obvious links to the business. It was an effective strategy to evade detection. This wasn't an isolated tactic either. The family used numerous businesses as fronts. They pumped dirty money into everything from car garages and gyms to beauty salons. In mid-2017, the Garda Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, conducted a major operation against the family's laundering network. In a single day, the Criminal Assets Bureau raided 5 car dealerships associated with the gang and visited 3 more, seizing over €1 million in assets including luxury cars and watches. Similarly, in late 2019, armed Garda units raided a gym in an upscale South Dublin suburb that the family was suspected of using to hide large investments of cash. Time and again, whenever law enforcement zeroed in on one front, the gang would shift to new businesses, always trying to stay one step ahead. Beyond businesses, the family also exploited vulnerable people as a form of human infrastructure for their empire. They often recruited low-level criminals and drug users to do the dirty work, storing drug packages, driving cross-country shipments, or acting as lookouts. In some cases, gang members would target individuals recovering from addiction, offering them free drugs to lure them back into dependency. Once the person was using again, the gang would enforce a drug debt on them and coerce them into working it off by serving the gang. For example, by holding stashes of narcotics in their home or acting as couriers. It was a ruthless but effective method. The person's addiction and fear of violence kept them under the family's control. Insiders say the gang maintained discipline through a mixture of fear and loyalty. Those who fell in line were rewarded or looked after. Those who betrayed the gang were dealt with harshly. Despite avoiding public gang wars, the family was notorious for brutal retaliation when threatened. Garda intelligence and court testimony have linked the gang to shootings and even murders of those perceived as threats or informers. In one court case, a senior detective testified that the family's members had used fatal shootings in the past against anyone who compromised their operations. This reputation for deadly vengeance meant that even though the family was less visible than other gangs, people in the criminal underworld knew not to cross them. Intimidation was a key tool. The gang didn't need to broadcast their violence. The whisper network of Dublin's underworld carried the warning. Occasionally, their hidden activities did come to light, offering the public a glimpse of the gang's scale. One such moment came in February 2015 when Garda raided a property linked to a trusted family operative named Jason Rowe. Rowe was a 40-year-old father of 4 living in Ballyfermot, and unbeknownst to neighbors, he was managing a major drug stash for the family. Acting on surveillance, Garda officers searched Rowe's home and an industrial unit he used in the Bluebell area of Dublin. What they found was startling. In a shed and attic on Rowe's property, they uncovered 3 submachine guns, 2 handguns, and a cache of ammunition, all carefully hidden. Alongside these weapons were drugs valued at over €3 million, including heroin and cocaine packaged and ready for distribution. Some of the heroin, about 2.7 kilograms worth €2.69 million, was stored in plain sight at Rowe's makeshift garage, disguised among car repair equipment. Other packages of cocaine and heroin were stuffed between rafters and insulation in the attic. The guns were cleverly concealed as well. 2 submachine guns were found shoved down the legs of a pair of tracksuit bottoms, and a pistol was hidden behind a false light panel. This bust was like an armory discovery, proof that the family was armed to the teeth to protect their product. Jason Rowe was promptly arrested and later jailed for 5 years on drug and firearms charges. Importantly, Garda recognized Rowe as working for the veteran West Dublin gang nicknamed The Family, which by then had been operating for over 2 decades. The Rowe case confirmed that the family had access to high-grade weapons and large drug stockpiles, reinforcing their status as a major crime organization. Perhaps the biggest wake-up call about the family's reach came in September 2020, with what would be known as the Stash House Raid. Acting on intelligence, Garda officers mounted simultaneous searches in 2 locations almost 200 kilometers apart, one in Mountmellick, County Laois in Ireland's Midlands, and another in the tiny village of Littleton, County Kerry on the southwest coast. These places were far from the gang's Dublin base and likely chosen as discreet hiding spots. In Littleton, officers descended on a secluded holiday cottage and caught Darren Hoey, a key member of the family, completely by surprise. Hoey was a trusted money handler for the gang. He had just arrived at the cottage carrying sports bags stuffed with cash. Garda moved in and found Hoey with €700,000 in cash in his possession, sitting in the bags. A search of the cottage then revealed an additional €2.8 million hidden on the property. Almost simultaneously, another team of officers searched Hoey's own home back in County Laois and uncovered another €700,000 in cash stashed there. In total, approximately 4.2 million euros in cash was seized from Hoey's operation, the largest cash seizure in the history of Irish crime investigations at that time. The sheer amount of money was jaw-dropping, but the details were equally telling. Meticulous ledgers found at Hoey's house showed that in just a 3-month period, July to September 2020, Hoey had overseen the movement of nearly 18 million euros on behalf of the family. This money was being collected from drug sales and prepared for smuggling out of Ireland to pay suppliers abroad and to be reinvested in the next narcotics shipments. Essentially, Hoey was acting as a shadow banker for the gang, collecting and counting bundles of euros, then arranging to ship the cash to foreign drug producers or brokers. When he was caught, it dealt a significant financial blow to the family. Hoey was arrested and, in 2021, sentenced to 7 years in prison for money laundering. Garda called his conviction a huge victory, as Hoey had been a critical conduit for the gang's funds. Not only did this raid deprive the family of a big chunk of capital, it also provided investigators with a paper trail of the gang's transactions and methods. Despite these setbacks, the loss of drugs, weapons, and cash in various raids, the family's core leadership remained remarkably insulated. Neither of the Grendon brothers nor Derek D.D. O'Driscoll were arrested in those early operations. They kept their names off leases, off company records, and away from the physical stash locations, making it hard to tie them directly to the contraband. This began to frustrate law enforcement. By 2021 and 2022, the family was at the top of every Garda watch list. The Garda Drug and Organised Crime Bureau ramped up surveillance on the gang. They also coordinated with international agencies, knowing that cutting off the family's supply lines would require going beyond Irish borders. Around this time, a new technological front opened up in the battle against the family. The gang, like many others, had come to rely on encrypted communications platforms to conduct their business. One particular platform came into focus, an encrypted phone network called Ghost. Ghost was similar to the infamous EncroChat system that many European criminals had used until it was infiltrated and taken down by police in 2020. Ghost provided custom smartphones with secure messaging apps that promised untraceable, self-destructing texts and calls. Users paid subscription fees for these modified devices and could only communicate with one another, keeping their talks closed to the outside world. The family gang adopted Ghost to coordinate drug shipments, laundered money transfers, and other criminal plans across Ireland, Spain, and beyond. In fact, authorities later revealed that at least 4 major Irish crime groups were using the Ghost network, and the family was the largest of them. What gang members didn't know was that law enforcement agencies had secretly hacked into Ghost. In an international effort involving Europol, a French judge issued a warrant that allowed investigators to penetrate a Ghost server discovered in France. Starting in early 2024, specialized cybercrime teams from France, Ireland, Spain, Italy, and other countries worked together to monitor Ghost messages live as criminals sent them. For about 8 months, investigators sat quietly in the digital background, harvesting a treasure trove of evidence from the family's encrypted communications. They read, in real time, how the gang arranged massive drug consignments, discussed moving money, and even ordered violent actions, all believing these chats were secure. This intelligence was pure gold for law enforcement, but they couldn't act on it immediately without tipping off the gang that Ghost was compromised. Instead, they planned a coordinated strike to make the most of the information. The takedown began in mid-September 2024. On September 16, 2024, Irish Garda units and their international partners executed a massive day of action against the family and associated groups. In Ireland, over 300 Garda officers were deployed in early morning raids across multiple locations. These operations, supported by special armed units, targeted safe houses, drug storage sites, and digital evidence caches that had been identified through the Ghost intercepts. The results were significant. In those raids, Garda seized an estimated 15 million euros worth of cocaine that the gang had stashed away. They also confiscated 350,000 euros in cash, 320,000 euros worth of cannabis, and about 100,000 euros worth of heroin. A total of 33 searches were conducted just in Ireland, yielding 42 encrypted devices, ghost phones and laptops, which were taken as evidence. Another 153 electronic devices were seized from various gang members for forensic analysis. One of the most dramatic finds that day was an articulated truck intercepted in transit in southeastern Ireland. Acting on ghost intel, officers stopped the truck and discovered 100 kilograms of cocaine hidden in expertly constructed secret compartments behind panels. And that wasn't all. In the lead up to the raids, as police quietly prepared, they had already intercepted an additional 118 kilograms of cocaine linked to the network. The September operation effectively dismantled the family's supply chain and seized a huge amount of their product before it could hit the streets. Perhaps most importantly, the ghost takedown gave police something they'd struggled to obtain before: clear evidence of the family's command structure and crimes. Through the decrypted messages, they now had direct links between the orders given by bosses and the actions of their underlings. With physical seizures in hand and digital evidence to back them up, law enforcement aimed to connect the Grendon brothers and O'Driscoll to specific drug shipments and money movements. Still, there was a legal hurdle. Ireland had never before prosecuted a case based on encrypted phone evidence. Authorities knew the defense would challenge this new kind of evidence in court. To strengthen their position, the Garda worked closely with Europol and Eurojust, Europe's judicial cooperation agency, to ensure everything was done by the book internationally. The success of similar cases in other countries, for example, prosecutions from the EncroChat hacks in the UK and Europe, gave them confidence. But Ireland would be breaking new ground. It all came down to making the arrests and securing charges to put the family's leaders on trial. This led to the final phase of the operation in March 2025, the coordinated raids that opened our story. In the early hours of March 24th, 2025, a Monday, heavily armed Garda special units, Emergency Response Unit and armed support teams surrounded multiple targets in West Dublin. They moved in with speed and surprise, aiming straight for the top tier of the gang. The boss of the family, believed to be Brian Grendon, and two of his lieutenants were arrested in those dawn raids on their homes in West Dublin. These were the three highest-ranking members of Ireland's biggest drug outfit, finally in custody. At the same time, three other individuals who acted as facilitators for the gang were also detained in Ireland. Some of these were likely logistics people or tech experts who helped maintain the ghost communications and transport operations. In total, Garda arrested 5 men that morning in Ireland, ranging in ages from their 30s to 60s, reflecting the multi-generational nature of the family. A 6th Irish suspect was picked up later that day, making 6 arrests in Ireland altogether. Simultaneously, the Spanish Guardia Civil, working on information from the same investigation, executed raids in Spain and arrested 6 suspects there linked to the Irish gang. Some were Irish nationals who had settled on the Costa del Sol, a known haven for Irish and UK criminals, while others were local collaborators. This perfectly coordinated strike, 6 arrests in Ireland, 6 in Spain, was unprecedented in scale for an Irish criminal case. Europol hailed it as the takedown of a high-risk Irish criminal network that had tentacles in both countries. In the aftermath, Garda press releases described those arrested as being key suspects in a sophisticated operation transporting large quantities of drugs between Spain and Ireland. The family, it turned out, had been using Spain as a staging ground to receive cocaine, likely coming from Latin America or via European contacts, and then conceal it in vehicles and freight bound for Ireland. The plan was clever: modify trucks or vans with hidden compartments in Spain, pack them with drugs, legally ship or drive them into Ireland, then unload the contraband for local distribution. This is exactly the kind of scheme that the ghost messages revealed and that police managed to foil in the September 2024 seizures. With the arrests in March 2025, the alleged masterminds of this whole enterprise were finally behind bars. The significance of this operation cannot be overstated. The family had been Ireland's most powerful drug gang up to that point, amassing wealth and influence while avoiding the fate of flashier gangs. Now, their reign was effectively over. Brian Grendon, Philip Grendon, Derek O'Driscoll and their associates were facing serious charges, including directing an organised crime group, drug trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to import drugs. Under Ireland's anti-gangland legislation, they could be held for up to a week for interrogation. and prosecutors could seek heavy sentences given the volume of drugs and money involved. One particularly noteworthy aspect of the case is that it marks the first time Ireland will prosecute using evidence from a hacked encrypted network. Law enforcement and legal observers are watching closely, as a successful trial could set a powerful precedent for tackling organized crime in the digital age. Europol and other international agencies have a keen interest as well. This is a test of how effectively cross-border police cooperation can bring down a transnational gang. The Irish authorities have expressed confidence that the evidence is overwhelming against the suspects, given the months of surveillance and the cache of messages and contraband seized. Still, the final outcome will depend on Ireland's courts and the ability of investigators to tie all the threads together in a clear, prosecutable narrative. As of this production, the case against the family is moving through the legal system. The arrests of March 2025 dealt a crippling blow to the gang's leadership structure. It's the culmination of a story that spans over 2 decades, from the late 1990s when a few low-level dealers banded together to the mid-2020s when they became so powerful that international agencies had to unite to take them down. The fall of the family is being hailed as a major victory for the Garda and their partners. It demonstrates that even gangs who operate in the shadows, avoid headlines, and use high-tech encryption are not beyond the reach of law enforcement. Irish police, working with Europol and others, methodically took apart the gang's finances, logistics, and communications until finally they were in a position to capture the leaders. In the Underworld, power vacuums don't last long. With the family effectively dismantled, other criminal groups will undoubtedly try to fill the void in Ireland's drug trade. But the legacy of the family's takedown sends a clear message. This gang grew enormous by staying out of the limelight, by learning from the mistakes of more infamous mobs like the Kinahans. They embedded themselves deeply into the fabric of the Irish drug market, from Dublin's inner city to rural counties, and made fortunes along the way. Yet, in the end, their own hubris and tools, the encrypted phones they thought made them untouchable, became their undoing. The family's story, from quiet ascent to crashing downfall, is a stark reminder that the law can eventually catch up with even the most secretive criminal enterprises. This has been the rise and fall of the family, Ireland's one-time hidden drug empire. Through patience and persistence, the Garda put an end to their reign, but the fight against organized crime continues. The drugs trade that enriched the family is still reaching every corner of Ireland, and new players will surely emerge. For now though, the empire built by the Grendon brothers and their crew has been toppled. Their saga stands as one of modern Ireland's most significant crime stories, a true crime tale of power, greed, and ultimate justice